So, welcome back to the second part of our Virtual Ninja show, talking about Defender for Endpoint settings management in the Microsoft 365 Defender portal. Wow, that's a long title. Today, we are going to do a deep dive into that topic, talking about multiple management channels, roles and permissions, grouping, targeting, as well as other identity scenarios. Of course, I have Dan with me again. Dan, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, Heike.
So for everyone who missed the part number 1, can happen, please go to our YouTube channel and watch episode number 1 and then come back to watch number 2. Dan, help me. There is a lot of management tools, I guess. We talked about now Microsoft Defender for Endpoint is having all the settings in the portal. We have Intune, but we have group policies and maybe have a third-party tool. So what if all of these are being somehow used, not together, or maybe those? Yes. What's actually coming down to the endpoint?
Yeah, that's a great question, Heike. So basically, like what we just announced, which is like really awesome and like bringing a lot of capabilities to the security admins, it has a lot of implications. It has a lot of implications from the UX perspective, from what happens in Intune, what happens in MDE. We talked about it just before. But in some areas, it can have implications that we want to be super clear with our customers what is going to happen. And if something that's going to happen is not intended, here's how you can manage it. And there's like 4 areas where we recognize that this probably will happen, especially for those amongst our customers that have what we can call a complex environment. So we're going to touch about complex identity topologies as well. The first one, which is probably going to be actually not for very complex orders, but for all of our customers. MDE just announced a new management channel. Like since 1 year, we have MDE acting as a management channel on a device. And there are already multiple tools or multiple ways to manage security settings on a device. In some cases, you can have a device that is simultaneously receiving, let's say a server that's simultaneously receiving settings from SCCM or Configuration Manager and simultaneously receiving some manual commands or group policy that it's receiving from an IT admin that configured group policy a while back. And an admin inside the SCCM portal doesn't necessarily know that. And so when we decided, okay, we're going to be releasing this new way of managing or configuring security settings on devices, we really wanted to make it clear for our customers, first of all, what's going to happen if you have other channels like these on a device, and what can you do with it? And so basically this table that I'm sharing with you here is, in a nutshell, what happens if you decide to manage with MDE a device that has any of the other management channels that you can see here in the column on the left. The first use case is what happens if a device is enrolled to MDE, but the device already has the Intune agent on it. So this would be an example for, let's say, a Windows device that already has the identity, it already exists in Intune, and it's already receiving policies. In that case, it's actually a simple use case. MDE will not enroll the device to manage it. So MDE is already on the device. It's already protecting the device with EDR capabilities, but you actually don't need Intune to do anything. Intune is already with an agent on the devices and managing security settings. You can leave it that way. In fact, managing the device with Intune will give you some capabilities that MDE can't provide you. For example, conditional access or compliance checks. So from that perspective, you actually don't need MDE. If the device is already onboarded, enrolled with Intune and managed using Intune, you're fine. Just keep it that way and you don't necessarily need MDE there. That's the first use case.
So what does it mean? I'm confused now. So, but you can still set settings in the MDE portal for that device?
Yeah, absolutely. But just Intune is going to be the agent receiving those. You need to, it's just like the UI is only the UI. It's where you configure. And now we're talking about management channels. So the Intune agent on the device or the MDE agent on the device. And all that we're saying is if you already have the Intune agent on the device, you don't need to ask MDE to be also able to receive policies. And so we took a conscious decision here for our customers. If Intune is already on the device, MDE just won't mess around. It won't start conflicting or creating complex situations for you. We just will leave Intune to manage the device. And so your policies will be received by Intune and applied by the Intune agent on the device. And you'll be able to manage that through the MDE portal as well.
Okay. So, and then we have SCCM, System Center Configuration Manager. We have our GPOs, our group policies, even PowerShell I see here. Yes. And then third-party MDMs. All of them means, because you have the MDE door there, that MDE will receive the settings.
Right. So in this case,
okay.
All of these other management channels, whether it's Configuration Manager, PowerShell, Group Policy, all of these basically will interact with MDE in a certain way. And the goal of this table is basically to make it very clear what's going to happen. So in the case where you have, let's say, a server that's already receiving policies or settings through Configuration Manager because IT teams are using SCCM to configure AV settings there, let's say. If you enroll the device with MDE, both of these management channels, both of these agents on the device can receive policies and apply them on the device. What's going to happen?
Okay, but who is winning?
That's what I'm getting to. The problem is that there is no direct conflict resolution mechanism. So what we've enabled for customers is two use cases. The first one is you can say, sorry, but I don't want MDE to act on this device. I want the same behavior as if the Intune agent was on this device. In other words, if I'm trying to enroll to MDE or enroll with MDE management, a device that is already managed by SCCM, MDE, please don't do anything. So that's the first thing. Security admins can ask MDE to always yield to Configuration Manager. And it's very simple. What's going to happen is MDE itself will detect that Configuration Manager is on the device and it just won't manage the device. That's the first thing. Now, if security admins, and we know this use case very familiar, like we're very familiar with this. It's, for example, IT admins still want to use Configuration Manager for vulnerability management perspectives or for patch updates, but they want to use MDE to push AV policies. They want to stop using Configuration Manager, for example. So what we enable in this case is for the device to receive policies via two channels, Configuration and Management and MDE. There is no conflict resolution. So in case you configure conflicting or contradicting policies in the two tenants or in the two portals, both in MDE and in Configuration Manager, the device will receive these conflicting values. And what's going to happen is every time the device will check into MDE, it will turn this setting on. And every time it turns to Configuration Manager, it will turn this setting off. What we recommend everybody...
I'm laughing, but it's actually not funny. So what are we doing?
So what we recommend our admins do, because the things that we don't want to override what IT admins have already configured and are happy with. So what we're saying is, if you're intending to move now to this journey where devices or servers will be managed both by SCCM and by MDE, please work together with your security teams, with your IT teams, and make sure that all the settings, all the security settings are managed using MDE, and all the IT settings are managed by Configuration Manager. But we as Microsoft are not going to just override what IT managers have been managing for years using Configuration Manager, just because a security admin turned on a toggle and wants to manage everything in their portal. It's like we recognize that there's roles and responsibility in these two teams. And so the way to solve it is an operational process between these two teams. Just agree. Security settings in MDE, non-security settings in Configuration Manager. That's what we recommend.
Okay. So I see this is the same for GPOs. So same discussion probably with the same folks that are managing GPO policies today. And then we have PowerShell and third-party mobile device management. This is MDE will override.
Exactly. So if a local user or a management channel or a third-party management channel is managing settings on a device, and the device is also managed by MDE, MDE will consistently override those settings. Now, I'm saying consistently, but I have to mention a big caveat there, is that sometimes with third-party management channels, we've seen here and there some strange behaviors where these third-party management channels don't necessarily use the formal MDM channel in order to push settings on a device. And so we're seeing some strange behavior. In general, we recommend using the Microsoft tools that use the legitimate Microsoft MDM channels in order to push settings on a device. But in general, if another channel or if another tool, or if you're manually using PowerShell to write settings on your device, you need to know that if MDE is on the device and it's configuring settings, anything that is manually configured on the device, let's say using PowerShell, it will be overridden by MDE. And MDE will not let the device respect those settings, basically.
Thank you so much. Our next topic was role and permissions. Let's dive into that. So, of course, we have permissions needed. We need permissions to actually set policies, edit policies, create a new policy. Where do we start to, first of all, understand what settings are needed, or like permissions? What are the roles, and where do I get the permissions if I need them?
Right. So, Heike, this one is like a burning subject because we're fixing something. We're bringing one portal into another portal. And these two products, originally, they basically have two different RBAC and permission mechanisms. And we wanted to solve this in a way that doesn't make a situation more complex for neither the security admins or the IT admins. And so what we're telling our customers is pretty straightforward. We're saying if you want to be able to manage security policies from the MDE portal, there's one requirement from the permissions perspective. You need to be an MDE security admin. This is the first screenshot you can see here on the left. In the roles area of the MDE portal, you need to be an administrator. If you are an administrator, you can edit and create policies directly from the MDE portal.
So wait. So this is a built-in group that is already there. Nobody needs to create that group. That is a built-in group available in Defender for Endpoint.
Correct. It's a high privileged permission, and there's like a default group that exists for it. It's a role, and it's called administrator, and it's somebody who can administer basically the MDE portal in general.
So, but then how can that person also, if the person creates a policy, it will create that policy in Intune? Where are coming the rights to Intune now?
Exactly. So that's the second part of the screenshot here. It's basically for the same user. That user will also need to have a specific Intune permission. So what we're saying is if the user already has permissions to create, edit, manage security policies in Intune, you don't need to change anything. You don't need to grant a new permission to that user. However, if the user does not yet have the permissions in Intune to manage security settings, all that we're saying is you need to ring a bell once to a security admin, and this is the role that we recommend you grant to those security admins. It's an Intune built-in AAD role. It's called Endpoint Security Manager. It already exists in AAD. It's a default group. It already has the permissions and the roles selected inside like the template. And basically all you need to do is once make sure that the user has this permission or this role. And as long as you as a user, you have that role, you'll be able to go in either in the Intune portal to manage security policies or also in the MDE portal if you're also an MDE security admin.
Okay, so what would be the experience? Let's say there is the permissions in Intune are missing. So you go into security management or policy management, endpoint management, whatever it's in the navigation. And then can you already click on new policy and then it will fail to create an Intune? Do you know what's the experience?
Okay, so there's two levels of permissions, as you understand. There's the MDE permission and the Intune permission. If you don't have the MDE permission, you won't be able to access the list of endpoint security policies. It will show you an error, and it'll tell you you need the security admin permission in MDE in order to view the list of policies. For Intune, however, if you do have the MDE permission, but you don't have the Intune permission, there are two cases. The first case is if you don't have Intune permissions at all. In that case, the list will be blank. However, you might have another situation where you have limited permissions in Intune. So I'll give you an example. Let's say in Intune, your IT admins have configured you to be able to see policies, but not to be able to edit policies. In that case, this use case will be respected by the MDE portal. So we'll list the policies, but if you go to create, it won't work. And here, what's important to mention is that we're working on something right now also, which we're about to release. But basically, if on your security team, there is somebody who has permissions like global admin permissions or the permissions to grant Intune permissions, basically that user, there's something new we're going to be releasing in the upcoming weeks. It's basically the same place we were before, the enforcement scope section of settings in MDE. You can go to Intune permissions, and basically this screen will enable you, instead of going to AAD in order to do this. If you remember, I told you before, we're trying to limit the number of times that you need to go to another portal in order to make these operations. Well, if you already have the right level of permissions to grant permissions, well, here it is. We're bringing to you the AAD portal inside MDE, and you can say, here are the groups or the people that I want to have the manage endpoint policies in Intune permission. And so you can just reach out to the admin that has this permission, and they can do this inside the MDE portal if they don't want to do it inside the AAD portal.
Perfect. Okay, so I think that was it for the roles and permissions. Our next topic was grouping and targeting. Explain, please, Dan, what is it we are going to talk about?
Yeah, so grouping and targeting is a big subject. It's one that my team is also currently working on improving for our customers. And what we're basically saying is there's a pain point. We're seeing a pain point where customers are managing groups in multiple portals using multiple constructs, and it's becoming harder and harder to manage at scale. So what we're doing now with the policies embedded inside the MDE portal is we're starting on a road to basically make these grouping constructs closer and closer together, so that soon enough, security admins won't necessarily even realize that they're interacting with AD groups and MDE groups and all these different grouping constructs with different capabilities, but they're always acting with the same type of grouping construct. Until we reach that target or that vision, what we're doing now is basically when an admin creates a policy, they have the same capabilities as those that they have in Intune, but there are some small limitations. The limitations are basically some caveats. So you create a policy, you create the settings that you want, you click next, it tells you, okay, who do you want to target this policy? First of all, in the MDE portal, you can choose all devices, or you can choose only AAD groups, and you can choose which AAD group you'd like to target. In Intune, there's an advanced capability called assignment filters. This capability, if you have the permissions in Intune, you can still use it in Intune. But in the MDE portal, we're not importing it. There are multiple reasons for it, but overall, it's to make the experience a little bit simpler. Similarly, there are Intune scope tags, which are an RBAC feature in Intune, which enable to configure RBAC when you create a policy itself. That is also something that inside the MDE portal, we won't be importing as something that you can configure. However, if you have the capabilities or the permissions and you intend to manage scope tags on policies also when you're a security admin, you can do that, but still in Intune.
So, but then you still need the Azure AD, Entra ID groups here.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the moment, policies can only be targeted to AAD groups. And we're working on that. We're looking at different ways to maybe make it easier for security admins. One of the things we're already enabling is the capability to exclude a group. So you can target one group and then exclude a subgroup in there. But there's going to be more progress there that we're looking into to improve this targeting experience in the future.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So now I think the last topic is different identity, providers?
Scenarios, like what do I do if I don't have Entra ID or AAD configured? How does this work or stuff like that?
Yes, please. I hope it's not too many people that are interested in this topic, but I know you wanted to talk about it because it comes up quite often.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, the MDE as a management channel, some people are seeing this as a way to solve for managing devices that are in multiple AAD tenants. This is something we get from large-scale complex organizations. And this would be a situation like I have on the screen right now, where let's say I have a server, it's on an on-prem AD domain. Can you manage it? That's something we get often. So basically the diagram you can see on the right is the situation of the device. This is like it's a server. It was until now managed only by Configuration Manager, but it's protected by MDE. Can MDE also receive policies? And the answer to this question is, bottom line, yes, but there's two things you need to make sure. You need to make sure that the device or this server never had an Azure AD identity in the past. So it had nobody ever tried to connect this Azure AD server, let's say the server to Azure AD. If that's the case, it doesn't have an identity. And if you want to enable the management, you need to basically enable what we talked about a little bit earlier before, a small toggle that says authorize this server to be able to receive policies both from Configuration Manager and MDE. And in this case,
and it would create that object.
Exactly. In this case, we will create like a placeholder object for the server inside the AD, in the Azure AD, and the device will be able to receive policies. So this is like one of the use cases we have, which is not really a multi-tenant scenario, but it's what I put in the bucket of complex identity use cases. This is for the first one.
Mm-hmm.
The second one that I get often is, okay, but I'm not using Azure AD or Entra AD as an identity provider. I'm using a third-party tool. What's going to happen on that device from an identity perspective? Well, even though you're not using Azure AD or Entra ID, MDE, just like it uses Intune, in the background, it's kind of the same thing that's going to happen in this case. So if we have a device, it has an identity and another third-party tool, and now MDE is on the device, MDE is going to be able to manage the device. Again, there's just that one big precondition that the device was never Azure AD joined in the past. This is also important because I encountered it once in one customer which tried to do a hybrid join environment in their environment. It didn't work, and then they abandoned the project. And then the device actually had an Azure AD identity stamped on it because of a tentative in the past. So if that's the case, MDE will detect that the device already has an Azure AD object, and it could create a problem. So if you want to manage something like this, make sure that your devices were never attempted to be AAD enrolled in the past. And yes, MDE will be able to manage that device.
So then help me understand, why is this a problem if the device has already the object?
It becomes a problem if the device already has an AD object in a different AD tenant than MDE is aware of. So MDE behind the scenes, it's connected like with a one-to-one relationship to an Azure AD tenant. Just like Intune also has a one-to-one relationship. And so what I'm trying to present here is, what if I'm taking a device which one day tried to join a different AD tenant, and several years later, we're saying, hey, let's now use MDE so that it creates an object as a placeholder in the current Azure AD tenant that we're actually centrally using. If the device already has like a stamp in the past, or like a tattoo from like a past experience that it was attempted to be joined to another Azure AD tenant, that could create an issue, and you would just need to do like a cleanup flow to make sure that the device doesn't recognize anymore any other Azure AD tenant, even if it was just a test. And MDE will be able to create a placeholder object in the current Azure AD portal.
Thank you. Missed that part.
Yeah, no, but thanks for confirming. It's complex. And so basically in these two scenarios, just to summarize, the bottom line question is always, does this device already have an Azure AD identity, or did it attempt to have one in the past?
In a different tenant though,
exactly.
Right? That's the important.
In a different tenant.
Yes.
Thank you. If it ever had an identity in a different tenant, MDE on the device will detect that there was an attempt in the past, However, if we understand that this device never attempted to join an Azure AD tenant in the past, let's say an on-prem server that has an on-prem AD domain and nobody tried to configure that AD domain to an Azure AD, MDE will create a placeholder identity for that device in the Azure AD portal. It'll look exactly like what you see right now on the screen. Basically, the join type for that device will remain blank. And you'll see that the MDM is Intune, etc., but you'll see the correct OS platform. So you'll have this information, but you'll see that the device actually doesn't have a join type. We're working also on better ways to present this than just a blank field so that customers can filter. That's coming up as well.
Okay, thank you. Any other identity scenario you can think of that you would like to clarify here for everyone who doesn't want to run into issues?
Yeah,
or maybe already ran into issues and now wants to understand.
Yeah, so we talked about them actually right now implicitly. But basically, if you have a situation where a device was in the past onboarded to a Azure AD, or for example, it's already managed by Intune, and then by default, it already has an Azure AD identity, MDE will not manage the device. If a device is managed by Intune, that won't happen. That's also true if the device is not even managed by Intune, but just it already has an identity in another Azure AD tenant, which MDE does not recognize. In this case, MDE on the device will not attempt to manage the settings on that device. If the device belongs to an Azure AD tenant that is not affiliated to MDE, the management capabilities won't work on that device.
Perfect. So I think this was pretty clear then, and everybody can, of course, go back and check again if one of those scenarios applies to them. So yeah, Dan, this was extremely exciting for me because I know many have asked for it, and there were like many questions on Twitter, LinkedIn, of course, in your channels that you have with your customers. Thank you so much for walking us through episode first one and now the second one, explaining for all your patients, all the details that someone needs to know to really better understand this new technology or this new feature. And for you out there, if you have still any questions, please visit the show page and you can ask the question for this episode. Or of course you can reach us on Twitter, LinkedIn, other channels. Don't be shy. And yes, I hope everyone tunes in again when we are back with our episode number 3. We will, I think, talk about the integration with Azure Logic Apps. We will have Christos back. And until then, stay safe. Bye-bye.